Welcome to the Hunt, Fish, Eat podcast. I am here with Matt Baum. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really well.
Good.
Doing really well. So, Matt is, in my opinion, kind of an expert on arrows and arrow building.
I know a little bit.
I
dabble.
Gotcha. Well, let's see. I met you probably a couple years ago or so, maybe through the internet. I think.
Yeah. Well, we both know Sean.
Yep.
And I guess it's funny. I think you. I don't think you beat me for the job at the time, but you ended up working in a position that I applied for, right? It's
That's
easy.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we kind of. I know your boss.
Yep.
I met him a couple times at some various shoots. So yeah, I think we've danced around in the same social circle a few times, just never met up before.
Yeah, I think we ran into each other at Jose Pepper's one time.
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's a small world for sure.
It is. Kansas City is a way smaller town than people give it credit for.
Absolutely. Well, I think especially in the hunting, shooting, anything like that, it's if you don't know somebody that you know knows them.
Yeah.
That's what I've always kind of said. So, but luckily you got to sit down here with me today, and we're going to talk about some heavy arrow stuff.
Yeah.
Specifically. So,
yeah, pumped about it.
I am too, and I didn't pick up a bow. I kind of started shooting archery about 10 years ago, but not seriously.
Right.
I'd say about 10 years ago, I had no idea what I was doing. Typical guy walking to a bow shop, the guy behind the counter tells me what to do.
Yeah.
Because I know nothing.
Yep.
And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I really decided to kind of seriously get into archery hunting. And Sean mentioned heavy arrow setups, and I didn't know anything what that meant. I'm a gun guy, so I understood physics and ballistics quite a bit.
Yep.
A little bit different with arrows.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of parallels.
There definitely is.
So that's how I met you.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we met. Now, Matt, tell me about yourself. You don't build arrows for a living, so what do you do?
No, I have a bunch of weird titles, but I work in IT. Okay. Long story short, I work in IT. You could say I'm like a data scientist light, I guess. I help companies that are trying to utilize and leverage their data and just use it for business process and business automation.
Okay.
So that's really what I do. Do you know what a Rolodex is? I'm guessing.
Yeah,
okay, so all of our grandparents had those Rolodexes. So imagine a Rolodex, but then it cleans your house for you. That's what we build on the IT side of the house for my company. So we accounts, contacts, leads and opportunities, stuff like that. We house all that data for people we don't do the housing. We help those people take that data and use it to better their business. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah, IT stuff.
That's
IT
fun.
Stuff.
That's fun. That's above my head, as we talked about.
It's all right. It's all right.
Luckily, we're not here to talk about that today.
Yeah. But that background, that profession has really given me an analytical look at the heavy arrow kind of thing. And that's when I kind of like you, when I got serious into bow hunting, I was like, okay, this makes sense to me mathematically. Yep. So this is the route I'm going to go, and I've never really deviated from it.
Absolutely. And one thing I noticed getting into the heavy arrow setup is there's a lot of information. There's a lot of math going on.
Yeah.
And I think it can be very intimidating.
Yeah.
Especially the guys who used to shooting a 300 and 320 grain arrow, total arrow weight. And they're thinking, hey, I want to shoot fast. That's good. Trying to get that guy to convert to shoot even a 600 grain, 650 grain arrow. That sounds crazy because you're more than doubling the weight. But like you said, when you look at the math, when you look at physics, it just makes sense.
It does. There's you can keep it as simple as you want, or you can. We've got guys. We've talked with that are engineers, and we're about to record with a guy that's literally a rocket scientist, not exaggerating.
Yeah.
He works for Lockheed Martin, and and those guys go to the extreme.
Yep.
But if you're just starting into this, you certainly don't have to do that. There's some really, really simple things that'll make it a really easy transition if you're using something like what you described, like a lighter arrow.
Yeah. And Matt, that's why I wanted to talk to you. Because like I said, it can seem very intimidating. And we're both members of a group. I think you're an admin on the High Momentum Archery group.
I'm not an admin.
Contributor.
I'm not an admin. Yeah, you could say I'm a contributor. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some of those guys on there, and rightfully so, they get deep into the weeds.
Oh, yeah.
On some of this math stuff. So What I want to do with this podcast is kind of do some approachable things, talk about the basics of what heavy arrows mean.
Yeah.
And especially about Ashby, Dr. Ed Ashby.
Yeah.
So let's start off. What is the Ashby Foundation?
Yeah. So the Ashby Bowhunting Foundation is an organization that was found. It was dreamt up probably 5 years ago at this point. But it really kicked off about a year ago, a little over a year ago. And their goal is to further bow hunting education and provide information to state and national agencies that want more information about how to most lethally pursue animals with a bow. And so they've partnered with like Texas Parks and Wildlife. They've partnered with the Professional Hunters Association of South Africa. They provided documentation for legislation that just got bow hunting passed in Russia. So they've been big contributors already, and all of that is based on the studies that Dr. Ashby did over the course of 30 years between Africa and Australia, and now here in the U.S. So yeah, it's a super cool organization, and they're it's just getting started.
That's really cool. And like I said, I just started hearing about the foundation a couple years ago, and like you said, I've seen the momentum kind of growing with that over the last year. And
pun intended.
Right. One of the cool things I found out about it was that Dr. Ashby helped legalize bow hunting in Africa. Before that, it wasn't really allowed because you see so many issues with game getting away, and even in the U.S. on whitetails.
Yeah.
Guys dinking deer right in the shoulder and not recovering that deer. So you can understand why wildlife managers are kind of adverse to that.
Absolutely. It's something that you have to consider. And we had when we had the ABF on for the first time when they came on with us, they told us that this is directly after they had partnered with Texas Parks and Wildlife, and the wounded loss rate, according to Texas Parks and Wildlife on bow hunting, is 60%.
Oh, that's incredible.
I mean, 6 out of every 10 animals that are hit with an arrow are never recovered, which is like
insane.
And the thing is, a big chunk of those are probably shots that are too far back and they're hitting the guts, and those animals will 100% die.
Yep.
They'll 100% die. They'll die of sepsis about 3 to 5 days later, give or take. And that really screws with. Can I say that? Okay. All right. Cool. That really screws with harvest numbers because then they don't know how many animals actually died during bow season. And especially when you've, here in Missouri and Kansas, you've got bow seasons that are 5 months long, 4 months long.
Yeah.
They go for a while. And, you think about, the amount of animals that are shot and then, multiply that times another 50%, and that's really how many died. It's a pretty incredible number. But, yeah, back to Africa, Dr. Ashby went over back in the early 80s, I believe it was, and did the Natal study. That was the very original study for, I believe it was South Africa, that wanted to verify that you could take large game with a bow. And yeah, he provided data over the course of a couple years, and they said, yeah, you can do it. And so it was legalized in sub-Saharan Africa. Before, when you see guys like Fred Bear and stuff like that, they were hunting it, but it was more of handshake agreements, kind of illegal stuff, or governments turning a blind eye to that kind of thing if the white guy was giving them a lot of money. There was definitely hunting there before, including bow hunting. But yeah, the current bow hunting scene in Africa, specifically sub-Saharan Africa, you can 100% credit to Doc.
Yeah, and one thing that really attracted me to the heavy arrow and what Ashby did and what the Ashby Foundation has done is it's real data. So you guys couple math and physics, the mathematical understanding, rock solid, this is what the paper says, with actual field testing. So, Ashby was shooting animals, to check penetration. So this is you and me come up with an idea, and then let's go out and test it. And so he has that real data. So I know a lot of guys can sit around a table and BS and think this is right or that is right, but to me this is hard evidence. It's in right there. So that's one thing I really like about what you guys have been able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's I think on every shot that Dr. Ashby took, there was 119 data points So, I mean, I can't even come up with 119. we sat around drunkenly one night trying to do it, and we couldn't come up with 120. And every single shot had 119. Now, a lot of those were like data points that were taken like before the shot, arrow weight and front of center, stuff like that. But yeah, it's a lot of data. It's a ton of data, which has been great because I've been able to help with that because I work in data in my 9 to 5. So it's been a ton of fun.
Well, and a lot of this was developed before Excel.
Yeah.
So,
no, they're going out there with pens and paper, literally,
that's
and
crazy.
they're writing it down. And it's. I think Troy's mentioned this before, Range Fairy, that they like Doc was like, here's my notebook, like go out there and write everything down. And Troy was like, we've got this computer now where you can put everything, and it makes it way easier. So,
well, I think Ed Ashby said, "Can you trust that? Does it
really
work?"
Yeah. But it's he put in some work over 30 years. That's for sure. And he did it all with no sponsorship, all out of his pocket. Paid full price on everything. All to benefit the hunting community.
Yeah,
so
that's really cool. I'm glad that he did that. So we kind of segue into this. So who was Dr. Ed Ashby? What's his credentials?
So Dr. Ashby was an eye doctor. When a lot of people think of eye doctors, they think of I won't even try and get into the terms, but they think of the guy when you go to Eye Masters or wherever, and you go and you have they one or two, and they're the glasses peddlers. And that's what a lot of people think that Dr. Ashby was. Dr. Ashby was actually an eye surgeon. And he was the head eye doctor for I think multiple Native American tribe lands.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
okay.
So he did that, and he was in the Air Force for a while. And then he went over to Africa initially because he was doing testing with Barnes bullets. So they were doing some very early ballistic coefficient testing and stuff like that from back in the 80s. So some pretty cool stuff. So he's actually an award-winning rifleman. He's an incredible shot, or he was. He's a little bit older now, but so he's he's got his doctorates. He's beyond well educated, and he's additionally all of his stuff was peer reviewed before it was published. So that's pretty slick.
That is really slick. So we kind of talked about what he did. When you look at those papers, and you could sit there and spend hours reading the papers.
Yeah, literally. I mean, there's 2,000 pages if you want to go into all of it.
Luckily, he kind of did a cheat sheet.
Yeah, he did do a cheat sheet. Do a cheat sheet.
Those are called the Ashby's 12 Factors of Penetration. For those of you that are looking for this, you can Google it, or if you go to the Grizzly Stick website, they have a lot of this information there. So let's go through what are the 12 factors, Matt.
Yeah, so I'll give you I'll do a really quick rundown 1 through 12, and then we can lightly touch on the ones that we need to.
Perfect.
So number 1 is structural integrity. Arrow can't break. Number 2 is arrow flight, quality of the arrow flight. Number 3 is the arrow weights forward of center, or front of center, whatever you want to call it. Number 4 is mechanical advantage. We can chat about that. Number 5 is shaft diameter. Number 6 is arrow mass. Number 7 is blade edge finish. 8 is shaft profile. 9 is broadhead / arrow silhouette. 10 is type of edge bevel. 11 is tip design. And 12 is arrow mass above the heavy bone threshold, which is 650 grains. So
that's a lot of stuff.
It is a lot of stuff. It's a lot to unpack, but really, this can be broken down. I think this is where the intimidation versus simplicity kind of comes to play, right? So this can be broken down really, really easily. Structural integrity is number 1. The arrow can't break. That's the most important thing. If the arrow breaks, all penetration stops.
And let's talk about that for a second. We'll kind of get into this a little bit later, but expandable broadheads. Most guys shoot expandables. So there's stuff moving around there. I have some of the cheap Rage chisel tips over there, and they're notorious for breaking upon impact. So, you're talking about structural integrity, as soon as something breaks like that, or a ferrule breaks or something like that, you lose all that momentum.
All that energy that's being put behind it is wasted. And so that's a lot of guys will, they'll have shot mechanicals for a long time, or they'll think they have tons and tons of energy, so they have the ability to shoot a mechanical, even though it's a poor mechanical advantage. We'll talk about mechanical advantage because it's not actually a mechanical advantage. But what they don't account for is all that extra energy that's being pushed on that broadhead. So the structural integrity is the whole system. Mm-hmm. Your broadhead can't break, your insert system can't break, your arrow shaft can't break, and your nock can't break. So yeah, if any part of it fails, all of it's out the window. Mm-hmm. So that's point number one. Shaft can't break.
Got to have that out of the way.
Yeah. Projectile can't break. So number two is arrow flight. None of this really matters if you don't have something that's flying correctly. So obviously, if you're going to try and like stab somebody, you won't try and stab them by like with the knife like coming in at the side, mm-hmm. right? You want to like put all your weight behind it and it go in a straight line. Yep. It's the same with arrow flight. You don't want your tail, the tail of the arrow sitting, 10 inches out to the right or the left of the head on impact, or else you're going to have a ton of lateral energy and you're going to lose all of that forward progress. Yep. So arrow flight is paramount. It is non-negotiable. If you have a poor flying 1,000 grain arrow, it will penetrate much less than a 300 grain perfectly flying arrow, probably. But it's beyond important. So those two are the main things, and I think a lot of people, even with all of this stuff catching on, I'm calling it the hunting public effect, because Troy got a hold of the hunting public, and then everything blew up. Yeah. A lot of these guys that are getting into this are blowing past 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. They're looking at how much weight can I stick on the front of the arrow and like still have an acceptable trajectory. It doesn't work. You have to make sure the arrow won't break, and you have to make sure that your flight's perfect. I wrap up number 3 with total arrow weight, and the way that we explain to people when people are like, "What should I shoot?" I think Doc had the best explanation. This was, I don't even know how long ago he said it, but he said, shoot the heaviest arrow where you have an acceptable trajectory with as much weight on the front as you can while maintaining perfect arrow flight. That's it.
That's pretty simple.
It's as simple as it gets. So structural integrity number 1, arrow flight number 2. I had a brain fart there for a second. Arrow flight number 2. Number 3 is front of center. So basically what that means is how much weight is on the front of the arrow versus throughout the entire shaft. So a good example of this, a really popular hunting arrow, is a full metal jacket. Mm-hmm. They have lots of flaws in my opinion, but the full metal jacket is a really heavy GPI shaft. So it's grains per inch. That means that if you go and you use the same components that you have on your current arrow, same broadhead, it'll probably bump up by about 100 to 120 grains, give or take. This is great, and overall mass is good to have. But what you should try and do is take that weight and shift it to the front of the arrow as much as you can. Now, with this comes some complications. When you move mass from across the entire arrow to the front of the arrow, what happens is when you shoot a bow, your string creates I call it arrow paradox. Some guys get super mad because it's not the technical term, but there's arrow flex, right? Yeah. And the more weight that's on the front of that arrow, the more the arrow is going to flex. So you need a stiffer shaft than what you would typically get. So a lot of these guys that are, like I said, they're blowing by 1 and 2, and they're throwing arrow flight right out the window. They're using their 330, 340 spine shafts, and they're buying 200 grain broadheads and 50 grain brass inserts, 100 grain brass inserts, and they're shooting them. And that spine, that 330 spine, which is a deflection number, is not stiff enough to handle that much weight up front.
So it doesn't matter if you're pushing that high weight, you're throwing a noodle out there, kind of like we talked about earlier on the flight of the arrow. If it's wiggling as it goes out there, it's not going to penetrate well either.
Yeah. You should be able to get an arrow, if it's properly spined, it should be recovering in the first 5 to 10 yards, mm-hmm. and after that, like it should be completely recovered, and all it should be doing is spinning. It shouldn't be wobbling all the way out to 20, 30 yards like you see some guys. Mm-hmm. So front of center is important for a couple of reasons, and I'll try and keep it simple. One, it improves flight quality with as long as you're properly spined. quicker recovery out of the bow, and just in general, it's a little bit easier to tune if you have a higher front of center. But more importantly, and what Doc found in his studies, is it increases arrow penetration substantially. So what happens when an arrow hits an animal, much like when it's shot from a string, the arrow bends, right? And when you have weight towards the front of the arrow, the node of the bending point is moved up. So a lot of people talk about front of center and like how it changes center of mass, and that's close, but it's not quite what we're talking about. So this node moves up, and the arrow, instead of having to bend, let's say, I don't know, this is a completely fake number, but instead of having to bend 6 inches vertically, it may only have to bend 3 inches vertically because that point was so much further up front. And that saves a bunch of energy as it enters the animal. And I think Troy's got a really good video of this when he shoots a target, and he shoots like a real low front of center arrow, and that tail is whipping back and forth like crazy. But then he shoots a high front of center arrow, and it just recovers like that. So
yep, and so
that's the big thing is the penetration enhancement that you get out of that.
Well, and that's the whole point of these 12 factors. The whole point of Dr. Ashby's research was to increase penetration.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that the higher penetration you can get, even when you're shooting through bone or heavy cartilage, the higher chance you have of recovering that animal.
Yeah.
Or being ethical about killing it. And that is our goal as hunters, is to recover the animal and be as ethical as possible.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Let's pause real quick on the 12 factors, and I want to mention a couple things. So I know a lot of guys that shoot light arrows.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of buddies that shoot light arrows. I have a lot of people I respect that have hunted for 20 years that shoot light arrows.
Yeah.
One argument I've heard from them is, okay, so that deer is standing at 30 yards. Let's say I'm pushing really, really fast, high feet per second out of my bow, a 300 grain arrow, really light. That deer can jump the string, right, at 30 yards pretty easily.
Yeah.
So the thought process is the quicker I can get the arrow there, the better my odds are.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that makes sense.
It's a valid argument.
On a basic level. But what I realized with heavy arrows is there's a little bit of delay, or can be, especially at long yardages. But if with the light arrow, you're not getting there much faster. It's not a lot faster.
The math shows that it's normally within a couple thousandths of a second.
Yep. Is
the difference. So yeah, it's not as big of a deal as people make it out to be. But I definitely understand where they're coming. They think, like, I'm shooting 50 feet per second faster than I would be normally.
Yep.
But I mean, let's think about like 50 feet in over one whole second. When typically when you shoot, even at like 20, 30 yards, from the time the arrow leaves the bow to the time it gets to the animal is way less than a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something that we need to kind of think about, where we aren't talking that these arrows are going massively slower.
Right.
So there is, and you don't get a massive advantage by just going a little faster.
Yeah. And
I think, again, it's for those that are rifle shooters, it's, do you want to shoot them with a 223, which goes screaming fast out of it, or a 30-06?
Right.
I think we all can understand that 30-06 is going to knock them over.
Yeah.
And we look back in history, in war, and we were shooting guys with 38 specials in the Spanish-American War, and they were getting back up.
Yeah.
Shooting with 45, they don't get back up.
Yeah.
Or at least they get knocked over. So it's kind of the same thing. Is it doesn't matter if the arrow gets there any faster if it isn't going to punch through. Right.
Yeah, so if it obviously penetration difference is really big, but my main, when people bring this up, and like I said, I completely understand the argument. When people bring this up, I normally ask them if they've ever shot like a heavier arrow, and just to set the record straight, a lot of people think that people who talk about Dr. Ashby are basically saying, like, if you aren't shooting like 600, 700, 800 grains, like, you are wrong, and you will never kill anything, when that couldn't be further from the truth.
Absolutely.
I would personally like to see people get around that 500 grain mark. I feel like if we were hitting about 500 grains, which isn't the heavy bone threshold, but that's for a different discussion, if we were around that 500 grain mark, I think our recovery rate would go up significantly. But when I ask these people if they've shot a heavier arrow, like one that's over 500 grains, the response is typically no. And what they don't understand is the amount of noise that is lost and the pitch of the noise that changes when you shoot a heavier arrow. So when you shoot these really light arrows, especially out of these speed bows, it sounds like a damn 22 going off sometimes. Yep. It can be crazy. But when you go from that 300 to 500 grains, man, that bow quiets down. There's way less hand shock, and it's way more of a thud than it is of a crack. Yep. And a crack is very abnormal in the woods. Animals react to that. In my experience, thuds, not so much. I think acorns fall all the time. What do you hear when an acorn hits?
Knocking your rocks together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, super common things. Things that everybody runs into.
Right.
So I mean, these deers are used to thuds. I mean, especially with acorns falling like all over the place. This isn't weird. So yeah, it's definitely something to think about. And like I said, I understand that they want the arrow to get there as quick as they can. But when I've seen constant videos being posted of deer jumping the string at 20 yards with like 330, like arrows coming in at 330, 340, 350.
Yep.
There is no argument to be made to try, at least in my opinion, that you will beat a deer's ear.
Yep.
Because I don't think that you will.
Well, and I think it comes down to how good of a hunter are you.
Mm-hmm.
If you draw back that bow and your bow creaks and the animal goes on alert, its ears perked up, even if it's not looking at you, any sound is going to make it jump. Right?
Yeah.
So you need to understand that.
Yeah.
Now you can kind of make the guess and go, well, I'll aim a little down and forward because it's probably going to jump my string.
Yeah.
You could also go right into the shoulder.
Yeah. I'm an advocate of aiming on, point at exactly where you want to hit. But yeah, I think animal alertness is a big problem, and to not beat around the bush, I think a lot of hunting shows ruin that for people because it was like getting these deer to stop because they're cruising along. And I get it, like I want to shoot it at a buck that 180-inch deer that's heavy in the rut too, and the only way you can get him to stop is to yell at him.
Yep.
Man, when you make these noises for a deer to stop, they go from 0 alertness to 100.
Yep.
And 100% alertness deer is going to jump the string a lot more than one that's just feeding, or one that's not aware, I should say.
And on that point, so when I first started looking at heavy arrow stuff, a lot of guys kind of criticize it because one advantage that we talk about with heavy arrows is you can shoot through bone, or a very high chance of penetrating through bone and shoulder blades. Consistently, right? So what I heard kind of the rebuttal to that is, well, I don't take crappy shots. I don't take dicey shots, and I understand that. And I'm the same way. I don't want to personally take a bad shot, but the scenario that kind of popped into my head is, let's say that deer comes in, it's quartering towards you a little bit. You're looking at it. Now, I'm not going to take a full frontal shot, but if I know I have a 650 grain arrow that's flying straight, that has a fixed blade broadhead on it, I can cheat a little bit towards that shoulder. I know if it hits the scapula, it's going to poke right on through. And take that shot, so that deer doesn't have to walk, and I know it's an ethical shot. And so that's one advantage that I kind of understood is it's not that I'm shooting at its brisket or something like that, but it's I can. If I'm a little worried about him jumping forward, you know what? I can just put it right on that crease. I know it's not going to matter. It's not expandable. It's not going to bounce off.
Right. So. Yeah. It definitely creates way more shot opportunities that are ethical.
Exactly.
I'm a little hesitant. There are some manufacturers that say this creates a 360 degree shot angle, which I get what they're saying, but it's really tough to take a full frontal shot on a deer that isn't alert. And then the alertness is a really big deal, obviously. So now if they weren't alert, if they were just sitting there, flapping their gums, chewing on whatever they were, looking around, and he turned the other way, if I was within 20, 25 yards, I might send it right in the boiler room on a frontal. But yeah, this it definitely changes things, especially on tree stand shots, where most of the time these deer are coming in towards you, and a lot of the times, depending on how you have the stand set up, there is no quartering away shot available. You have 30 seconds to shoot it as it's walking in, and the only shot opportunity you're going to have is a quartering too. And having a heavy arrow with a good cut on contact broadhead opens up that opportunity for you.
Well, let's not give too much more away, so let's kind of go keep going down the list.
Yeah, yeah. So where
the
are we
fourth
at?
factor of penetration.
Yeah, fourth is, I've got a reference sheet here, is mechanical advantage. So long story short, mechanical advantage is essentially the amount of work that broadhead has to do based on its design. So a longer, thinner, I'm going to make this like really elementary. If people want to look it up, they can. A longer, more narrow broadhead is going to have a better mechanical advantage. And this can be broken down by math. I can't remember the formula off the top of my head. It's like the amount of blades times the length divided by something. I can't remember. It's on the internet. You can look it up.
Like everything, it's on the internet.
That's right. Oh boy.
Well,
okay, we're good.
Kind of analogy to explain that is it's going to be a lot easier to poke through something with a knife than it is a shovel.
Yeah, absolutely. So a good mechanical advantage head, if people are just like wanting to look up something right now, would be something like a tough head or a grizzly stick samurai or a RMS gear cutthroat or something like that. Good mechanical advantage heads. 99% of mechanicals are a very poor mechanical advantage. And the reason is these mechanicals boast how wide the cut is, when I have found, and a lot of other guys have found, that the more narrow the broadhead, within reason, obviously, you don't want to be shooting a pencil at them, but the more narrow the broadhead, the more the better chance you have of being able to go all the way through the animal. And that's the most important thing. The biggest thing with recovery rates is if you put 2 holes in the animal that aren't supposed to be there, that animal can't live. 1 hole, it's possible. 1 hole is possible. 2 holes, very, very difficult. Very difficult. So that's mechanical advantage. Number 5 is shaft diameter. So shaft diameter is really just all it means is that the ferrule can't be smaller than the shaft. So I mean, imagine it creates a bit of a lip is all it does. So that's really all that's saying. But in doc studies, I think he found a 10% penetration gain when the shaft is at least 5% smaller than the broadhead's ferrule. So if your shaft is just a little bit smaller, it's helpful. And that's especially prevalent now with all these small diameter, like the 204 diameter and 166, the micro diameter arrows that are coming out now. So that's really helpful. 6 is arrow mass. Basically, all of your penetration potential is dictated by how much your arrow weighs. And once again, I'm not trying to get people to shoot like a 600 or 700 grain arrow. Like, if you want to, by all means, go for it. Because even these compound guys that are shooting 6, 7, 8, 900 grain arrows are still shooting way faster than these guys shooting trad bows.
Yep.
And that's all these guys are like, I'll never hit a deer like this. I'll never hit a deer like this. Well, these guys kill elephants with traditional bows all the time. Well, that's not true. I don't know if elephants, but they kill animals all the time with trad bows. I mean, Aaron Snyder's been laying waste to all of North America with a trad bow for the last 3 years.
That is the truth, man.
So I mean, there's no excuse to say that it's too slow. Now, obviously, you want an acceptable trajectory, especially when you're using sight pins. But saying it's just too slow to kill something in general is just not true.
Absolutely, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the fast arrow debate of getting to the animal, and penetration is what matters. Yeah, absolutely. Now, I guess to touch on this a little bit in a different way, there's a weird what's the word I'm looking for? And when like a bunch of people think it, but it's not true. There's a word out there I'm thinking of, but I can't remember it. But anyway, there's this train of thought. It's kind of like confirmation bias. Yeah. But if you go into any archery shop, or if you go online and you ask people where is like I want to build the heaviest arrow possible for the most energy, a lot of these shops would be like about 500 grains or like 450 grains is like where your energy tops out. When that's not true. You will continue to gain energy based on your arrow mass well beyond what you will ever want to hunt with. We've tested bows up to 2,000 grain arrows, which is, I mean, most guys hunt elephants with
1,000 to 1,200 grain arrows. So double what you'd hunt an elephant with. You'll never hunt with a 2,000 grain arrow, and we were still gaining energy. The problem is a lot of these like arrow speed calculators online are linear. They look at the energy gain with that as a linear gain as opposed to an exponential gain because of the lack of efficiency in the bow. Because with the more mass that you have that string is pushing against, the less vibration, the less noise, all of that stuff is energy that's being transferred into the arrow instead of into the bow. So you continue to gain energy no matter how much mass you add. Just want to toss that out there. We're working on a study where we're going to basically prove this with a white paper over 10 bows. Have you seen, I'm sure you have, Aaron Cowan's Sage Dynamics white paper on RDS stuff?
Yep.
I've chatted with Aaron, and I'm like, I'm going to do this for something else, and he gave me a couple tips on some stuff to do. So,
awesome. Well, I'll look forward to that, man.
Yeah, we can't wait to get that out. So you want to bounce to something else, or you want to keep chugging along on these?
Let's keep chugging along on these.
Okay. So 7 is blade edge finish. So I'll give the like mega abridged version. Dock. So basically, a clean cutting blade is going to be better to get your animal to continue bleeding than one that has a serrated edge. That's basically all that means. There is a crazy complicated medical process that happens there that Doc has explained with a bunch of words that I can't pronounce. If you want to go look it up, it's really interesting. But basically, like, think of it when you cut yourself with like shaving or something like that. It looks like you don't shave too much, but
try not to.
Yeah, well, I can't grow facial hair. This is like 2 months of growth. For me.
Man,
yeah.
Hey, you tried.
I tried. I have too much Native American blood. But when you like cut your face shaving, that thing will bleed and bleed and bleed and bleed, and it won't stop. And a lot of the times you don't even feel it, right? And it's the same thing with a very sharp, clean edge profile. A lot of these times, if you get it sharp enough, a lot of these animals won't even feel it. They'll just like look around when they get hit. They don't even know what happened. But man, they will bleed buckets if it's because what happens is when you shoot with a serrated blade, the veins get torn instead of cut cleanly. And when the veins are torn, they are more likely to clot. A clean cut vein can't clot. So, long story longer, not serrated, better.
No, that's a good point to make. I had a buddy who, out of a blind, he shot 2 does back to back. They came in, he shot the first one, and he said it stood there and he thought he missed. And then he saw blood start pouring out the far side, and so he knocked another arrow and dropped that second doe. He's like, I got 2 tags. And he was just stunned. But he went up on her and she dropped, I think within a minute or two. She just kind of took a knee down. But he said he attributed it to that. That clean cutting front edge just passed right through her. So, absolutely. Yeah.
So, number 8 is shaft profile. So, a tapered shaft will penetrate more than a parallel shaft. Now, there's basically only 2 companies that are halfway reputable to make a tapered shaft. That's Grizzly Stick, who's made by Victory, and Easton makes the T64 FMJs. Both are pretty steep, but this is number. We're getting down to stuff where it's like, if you aren't doing this, it's not a real big deal. This isn't like make or break stuff on your animal.
Yeah, so I do a lot of shotgun shooting, do a lot of rifle shooting, and you'll get a guy that comes to shooting shotgun. He's like, man, I think I should be shooting an improved cylinder choke instead of a modified choke. And I said, well, how much have you been shooting? Have you taken lessons from a coach? What kind of gun do you have? And I just started shooting 2 or 3 months ago. It's like, well, when you're looking at breaking a target, looking at a great target, there's like 100% is what you're looking at. About 80% of it is practice and the gun fitting in. The other 20% is like choke selection, shots. These little things that everyone focuses on and freaks out about. So it's kind of the same thing. Not that you shouldn't know about it on the bottom of the list, but the kind of points we're getting to here are less important than the first 7 or 8. Yeah,
those I would say, like the first 6, I would say like pay close attention to those. Play close attention when you can. But now we're starting to wade into some stuff that's really we're splitting hairs at this point. And I completely agree. Like training. I mean, if you're an archer, I mean obviously practice is important, but getting out to 3D shoots and going and getting hooked up with like a level 3 or level 4 NASP or whatever it is, certified coach to like work on your form. Start using a back tension or a hinge release or something to really execute, really good shot, or to have really good shot execution. A lot of things here that you could do that are going to improve you as a shooter that are probably going to benefit you more than like really digging deep and trying to hit every single one of these points.
Absolutely.
You want to keep chugging along, or you want to switch it up a bit?
Let's talk about some other things for a second. So, have we talked about fixed blades yet?
Indirectly.
Okay, let's talk about fixed blades.
Okay.
I think is that 0.9?
0.9 is broadhead arrow silhouette. Which is type of edge bevel is probably what you're thinking of. Yeah. That's number 10. But yeah, we'll get there in a minute.
Sounds good. So let's talk about broadheads then.
Yeah.
So fixed blade is in addition to the heavy FOC, kind of this whole movement. They also don't make a lot of expandables that are 200 grain or 175 grain.
Right.
Now, there are some companies that are coming out with quality expandables that are a little bit heavier. Again, you look at mechanical advantage. So when that broadhead has to open up on impact, you're losing momentum.
Yeah.
And I think Aaron Snyder did a test where, it's kind of a redneck test.
Yeah.
Pushing it through elk hide. With a mechanical, it took about 40 to 50 pounds. And with a fixed blade single bevel, it was 5 or 6 pounds.
Yeah.
So when you look at those numbers, again, this isn't, this wasn't in a lab, it wasn't scientist tested, but that's just kind of, redneck science. You can, when you just hear those numbers, you understand, oh, okay, that's a lot harder to penetrate with an expandable.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to look at some scientific ones, Bill had him on the podcast. I should remember it's Vander Hayden, I think. I can't remember because I pronounced it wrong on the podcast. It's really embarrassing. But he's the owner of Iron Will, and he is a terrifyingly intelligent engineer. And he's got on his website, he's got some really good data on some push force gauges that he's been using to test his stuff versus other people. And I think the mechanicals did so poorly he didn't even put the results. That kind of bad.
But does Iron Will make some expandables, don't they?
No, Iron Will does not. Iron Will does not. But so here's the thing: like even if you had a mechanical that had an equal mechanical advantage, and you were shooting the same mass, the number one, number one is structural integrity. That's always the main point, and it is just really, really, really difficult to build a mechanical that has thick enough blades for structural integrity to not be a major concern. Because if those blades bend or snap, like, you're toast. Yep. And especially, and that's the other big issue is 99.9% of the time those ferrules are cheap pot metal or super cheap aluminum, and they'll bend. The second you hit something hard, they will bend. Now, if you hit soft tissue, or maybe a rib on a whitetail or something, you're probably going to be fine. It's not a super big deal. But it's the likelihood of mechanicals breaking on heavy bone is very, very high. But yeah, outside of that, I'm just keep coming back to other people for people to look at. Shane Simpson runs a page called Cali Chronicles, and he runs around with the hunting public and those guys quite a bit. But he's a blood tracker with his dog Cali. And the pass-through rates with mechanicals was exponentially, I want to say it was like half the amount of fixed blades. So if you want to pass through an animal consistently, a good cut-on contact fixed blade, and cut-on contact is very important there. A lot of these chisel tips from like Muzzy and stuff like that, and people were like, I built the 600 grain with a Muzzy on the front. I'm like, man, like you tried so hard.
You're almost there.
And not to take anything away from them, because I would, if I was venturing to guess, I would if there was one brand of broadheads that killed more animals than anything, it's probably Muzzy. But those chisel tips make it really hard to try and get that initial penetration. And so a cut-on contact head, where like the second you hit it, like there is cutting going on, is really, really helpful in getting penetration.
That's definitely a good point to mention. And So one thing that we haven't really talked about yet is expense. So you kind of mentioned with arrow shafts and things, this can get pricey.
It can.
A lot of this stuff gets pricey. I think, a pack of like 3 samurais from Grizzly Sticks about $80.
I think 90. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're looking at $100 for 3 broadheads.
Yeah.
And you can go buy. I'm not trying to bash Rage, but they're kind of the cheaper end on expandables. You can buy a 3-pack for like $15. Or maybe $20. And so you can understand a guy that's just spent $1,000 on a bow and is spending hundreds of dollars to go hunt and tags. It's like, man, I don't want to spend $100 on 3 broadheads.
Yeah, and I definitely. So there are multiple ways to go with your arrow build, right? You can go as expensive as you can think. You can go buy some Bishop Scientific Methods that are $300 for 3, with some Bishop arrows, or I think Bishop probably makes the most expensive stuff, but it's pretty decent. It's not. I don't think it's the best by any means, but they think it is. You can spend exorbitant amounts of money on arrow setup, but you can spend basically the same and get a way better setup. So we did a couple episodes called Balling on a Budget, where we basically took like really popular setups and we're like, okay, here's what this costs. Let's see what we can build with that. And we use like Carbon Express, which is like, I feel like everyone in the Midwest shoots Carbon Express reds or blues with a Rage. And then we did a Full Metal Jacket with Slick Tricks. Man, you can do something really simple like Black Eagle Renegades, which you can get like a dozen for like $90. Like it's crazy, it's stupid cheap. And just put like a 50 grain brass insert in there. Buy 1 aluminum arrow from your local pro shop, chop it down to a bunch of 2-inch footers, glue it on there, and your arrow is already exponentially better than anything that is quote unquote store bought, right? And then when it comes to broadheads, I definitely understand not wanting to spend $100 for 3. Totally get it. Even me, that is a total broadhead nerd, sometimes when I see a new broadhead come out, I'm like, I have to spend $120 again. And it gets really old. But VPA makes an incredible broadhead, and they're like $45 for 3. Grizzly Sticks Overkill series has been doing really well. It's killing dangerous game in Africa. It's like $50 for 3. Cutthroat's gone up in price a little bit, so it's hard to recommend them in that like super bargain realm. But man, little known fact, not Cutthroat. Yes, Cutthroat. VPA makes Cutthroat's heads.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah. So and they're made. VPA's heads and Cutthroat's heads are the same steel. They're both 41L40, which is a really good like tool steel, high carbon tool steel. So you can buy a VPA, which is basically like the design's a little bit different from a Cutthroat, but man, like I don't know if a VPA can be beat for that like under 50 price range. It's really, really tough.
Yeah, well, I think like you mentioned the Grizzly Stick Overkills. I have a couple of those. Also from Grizzly Stick, I got the Samurais. They have like a clearance bin. Sometimes
they'll be off by like 4 grains or something.
Yeah,
spoiler alert, doesn't matter.
Right, I bought like 10 of them.
Yeah, because they're like $10 a piece or something. Like really
super
cheap.
Yeah, and they're sharp. They're just the same quality steel as the other Samurais. I also have some of the RMS gear Cutthroats as well. I think those are really good broadheads. Really good heads. And those for a long time were kind of the budget head.
They were.
For the fixed blade. But like you said, there's some other companies coming out with some really good stuff as well. So, but to me, it's kind of like anything you invest in. Like, I think we've all had to buy a bunch of the collars for the expandable broadheads, or buy new blades, or sharpen the blades.
Yeah.
And, so if you're buying a $20, $30 pack of 3 broadheads, and you got to do a bunch of work to them, or you're not confident when you start to pull your bow back, I'd much rather spend $10 more broadhead and have a lot of confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, it's a bit of an investment, and I totally get that. But, typically when you buy a decent head like a VPA or Grizzly Stick or Cutthroat or any of those guys, you get 4, 5, 6, 7 kills out of one head. When you shoot these cheaper mechanicals, you hope you don't like accidentally send one into the plywood or to your backstop before season, because then it's trash. You won't be able to use it. But 2, once it goes through an animal, it's basically done. You can't use it again. You can't resharpen those blades, so you're going to go spend another $10-15 for replaceable blades or whatever. And it's just economically, it can actually make a lot of sense to just invest in like a decent fixed blade.
Buy once, cry once. Right?
That's right.
It still comes true in arrow building and all that.
Yeah, but like I said, you can build a really good arrow for not much. But for as far as budget-minded arrows go, man, Black Eagle is about impossible to beat for quality. And I know everybody, especially recently, and I get it. Everyone's like, oh, like all I want to do is buy American-made products. Spoiler alert: there is not a single carbon arrow made in the U.S. Yep. All of them are made overseas. So if you're going to shoot a carbon arrow, you aren't going to buy U.S. made. So yeah, I mean, Black Eagle comes from overseas, but man, they are stupid straight. They are stupid tight on weight tolerance, and they are really durable with the right ones. If you buy the ones that have like super high modulus carbon, the XM packs or stuff like that, not a massive fan. But the Renegades, the Carnivores, man, those shafts are awesome shafts.
Yeah, and I think too. So part of the problem with going heavy is there's not a lot of shops you can walk in and say, hey man, I want to do a 600 grain arrow.
You're telling me?
Yeah.
I walk in, they look at me like I've got 3 heads.
Yeah, they'll laugh you out of there. So one thing I like about Black Eagle is they are building arrows for guys to go heavy. I've called and talked to them a couple times. They're very helpful.
Yeah, Randy's the owner, right? Dude is like the nicest guy you will ever meet. Like literally salt of the earth kind of guy. Yeah.
So that's I love companies like that, and if I want to try something different than the stupid fast arrows, like I want some help with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I bug you enough,
No,
so,
that's fine. It's no worries.
But no, I want to do a shout out for Black Eagle. They've been really open to do that, and they're pushing those heavy arrows.
Yeah. Well, I think I hunters as a whole need to realize and like get on social media all during bow hunting season or like leading up to bow hunting season. You'd think that everyone hates everybody. Like there's no friends in there, is what you would think. But with as much infighting that happens, bow hunters, I do genuinely think want to increase success rates because as much as we fight amongst each other, it's the antis that'll get all of us.
Absolutely.
And it is doing nobody a service when pilled out Karen takes a picture of a deer with an arrow sticking out of it, posts it on social media, and people start lighting it up. That's not what we want. So yeah, it's in everybody's best interest to make sure that arrow goes through the animal.
That's 100% true. So we've kind of talked on our soapbox about fixed blades for a little bit. Let's finish the 12 factors penetration here.
All right, let's round it out. So we talked about shaft profile. Number 9 is broadhead and arrow silhouette. Basically, it means that you don't want a broadhead that has like that's like really bumpy or has like abrupt like changes in diameter. That's not going to help. So that's basically all of that. All of that's saying. Type of edge bevel. So there's basically 2 type of edge bevels that you can have on broadheads: a single bevel and a double bevel. Single bevel means that it's ground to cut on one side. A double bevel means it's ground to cut on both sides. Long story short, single bevels, because they're ground to cut on one side of each side of the blade, they will rotate as they impact, and they will like twist through and crack bones that creates more an easier path towards continuing to go through the animal. So single bevels are better, but in like a really good quality broadhead, like an Iron Will, it's double bevel. Day 6 is single bevel. Even Grizzly Stick, who's like the single bevel kings, sell the Silver Flames, which are double bevels. Or I'm sorry, all those other ones I mentioned, double bevels, not single bevels. But yeah, tons of really good double bevels. So this isn't like a huge deal breaker, but guys that are hunting like dangerous game, like Cape Buffalo, elephant, rhino, giraffe, stuff like that. Giraffe isn't a dangerous game, but
they're scary. They can be scary.
They're so big.
So my son has a little one that he plays with in the bath. Nothing gets going.
Single bevels are better in that aspect. Tip design. Tip design is number 11. Basically, all it's saying is that you don't want to have a tip that will skip off of like a glancing impact, or like create a glancing impact. And what a Tonto tip, if you're familiar with knives at all, a Tonto might make sense to you. A Tonto tip is what Doc found to be the best tip design that will continue to penetrate and not glance, but still be really structurally sound. Sorry, I'm coughing here. I don't know if it's going to make your editing, if you're even going to edit it, but if you do, I apologize. In number 12, so this is kind of an interesting one, is arrow mass above the heavy bone threshold. So the heavy bone threshold that Doc found is 650 grains. So I'm going to explain what this means. Doc did his testing on Asiatic buffalo, and he did it on Asiatic buffalo for a very specific reason, because Asiatic buffalo have overlapping ribs. There is nowhere you can shoot in an Asiatic buffalo where you will not run into some type of hard bone. Now, ribs on a buffalo are very, very big. They're comparable to like almost the size of a humerus in a deer. So just think about that. Like, I mean, they're really, really thick. So no matter what bow he was shooting, all the way down from a 38-pound longbow up to an 85-pound compound, and they even did the test later with crossbows. Once he crossed that 650 grain threshold, he was able to breach that front heavy bone 100% of the time, or nearly 100% of the time. I think he did it like 180 shots in a row at one point. Like, oh, wow. Yeah, it's for some reason, and it's not like a super mystery, but there is a massive increase in being able to consistently break bone at about the 650 grain mark. Now, where this gets construed is a lot of people think that, like, everyone's like saying, you know, if you don't do 650, you're doing it wrong. I work hand in hand with the ABF. My heaviest arrow setup that I will be running this year, if I do get to hunt, is about 600 grains. It's not the end all be all. And the thing that people don't realize about animals, or what they don't take into account, what's really funny is because people try and use this to like discredit Doc. So when Doc was shooting these buffalo, he would shoot them, kill them. A lot of times he'd shoot them with a rifle first, just to drop them stone dead. Yep. But then he would run up there, and they'd have about 15 minutes before rigor mortis sets in. That's for people who don't know what rigor mortis is. When you see the deer on the side of the road with its legs straight up in the air, it's all stiff. That's rigor mortis. So before rigor mortis begins to set in, because that changes the chemical compound of the bone and the flesh, they would just shoot these Asiatic buffalo, just boom, 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 shoot them full of arrows. But what people don't take into account is a moving animal. An animal that's moving down, like a lot of ones that will duck, it doesn't matter if you shoot 1,000 grain arrow. A lot of the times it's just not going to go through because the animal is moving in such a way that it's going to completely deflect the energy of that arrow. Yep. There's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Nothing. Except from try to shoot a not aware animal, which is what we talked about at the very beginning. So, but the 650 grain threshold, I don't know if he says it in here. I think he said initially, or a long time ago, I think he said, like, if you hit heavy bone, then number 12 jumps to, like, number 4. But if you don't hit heavy bone, and heavy bone is basically, like, humerus, like, even, like, whitetail scapula, not considered heavy bone. Yeah. Humerus, like, from a leg, pelvis, if you're shooting, like, a really hard quartering quartering away, stuff like that is considered heavy bone. So, number 12, heavy bone threshold over 650 grains.
Yeah, and I want to mention, too, kind of like we talked about, you can't just look at one of these points and make your arrow off that. You know, right. You can't go grab your 400 spine arrow and throw a 200 grain broadhead on it. Right. You throw a noodle out there. So,
it's all system.
Like FOC, when you're calculating FOC, and I'll put that in the notes about how to do that. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty simple formula. But I have an arrow that I built that's 700 grains, total arrow weight, with a 200 grain broadhead. I have another one that's a 650 grain arrow with 200 grain broadhead. The 650 grain arrow, because the way I built it, has a higher FOC in front of center than the 700 grain. So I think it wasn't surprising to me after I did it. It was like, it clicked in my head, oh yeah, just because you have weight in the arrow doesn't make it a higher FOC. Right. And I had a friend of mine that's been shooting arrows a long time. He kind of brought that up to me. there was a guy that did a test. Can't remember the guy's name, but on YouTube he shot a bunch of stuff, ballistic gelatin with quote unquote heavy arrows, and all it was he put that insert in there to add 200 grains to a normal arrow,
right?
And he wasn't getting the penetration, and it's like, well, you're not looking at the whole picture,
right?
You're not throwing a stiffer arrow, you're not putting high front of center, so it's when you're looking at this list of 12 things, if you just focus on the first 3 or 4, you're gonna be really far down the road,
right? And also, not to mention, because you brought up gelatin, and I'm sure that you working for a firearms company, you see a lot of gelatin tests. Gelatin tests on arrows mean diddly. Gelatin was created to simulate. It was created for FBI standards, if I'm remembering correctly. But all it was really made for was to see the channel that was created when a projectile entered the ballistic gel, and people thinking that the gel stopping certain things before others, or you see a lot of these guys shooting. They'll shoot a heavier arrow and it goes half an inch more, and they're like, I lost 50 FPS for an extra half inch of penetration. No, not doing it. It's not accurate.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to look at your penetration potential increase, look at your momentum value. So a lot of people get kinetic energy is the buzzword for archery. But if you really want to look at a closer indicator, and that's not even the whole story, but a closer indicator is your momentum value. And typically, when you increase weight by 30%, you increase your momentum value by about 30%. It's pretty substantial stuff. So yeah, look at momentum instead of kinetic energy if you're really wanting to look at what your penetration potential is. But more so even than that, mass is king. Mass is always what's going to dictate really how much stuff has to be stopped, right? So it doesn't matter if it's being shot from a longbow or a crossbow. The heavier it is, tougher it is to stop it.
Absolutely, that's 100% correct, and I think that's what we're trying to look at with the Ashby, the 12 factors of penetration, and this whole podcast is just the point of FOC, the point of going heavier on arrows is better penetration.
Yeah.
And increasing that momentum, and with that momentum, with the penetration, you have a higher chance of being ethical.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about this. If you've listened this far on the podcast, we probably sold you on going heavier. And like Matt said, we don't have to go 700 grains.
Yeah.
You go 500 grains, get a little bit stiffer arrow, get a good arrow profile, make sure tune the arrow, tune the bow.
Yeah, both got to be tuned too.
If you do a couple of those things, you're going to have a better chance as well.
Yeah.
Going in there. So, the issue I ran into, luckily I had a Matt Baum that lives in Kansas City and could help build me some arrows when I first got started in this. But a guy that doesn't have that, doesn't have access to it. So building arrows, that sounds scary and complicated.
Yeah.
How do you get started doing that?
So, if you want to build your own, the two biggest things are going to be an arrow saw to cut the arrow, and a fletching jig. Those are the two biggest things that you're going to need. If you want to go really redneck on it, you can buy a little saw thing from Harbor Freight and work it up in a way to where you can cut arrows with it. And then if you can buy a $20 arrow square, these guys sell 3D printed ones. You just put a piece of sandpaper on it and you square your arrow with that. So you could buy that Harbor Freight thing if you really wanted to. Because a saw is typically the most expensive. Those are going to be about $130, $150, even more if you want the Gucci ones. But then your fletching jig, you can go as simple as buying the little plastic boning one for $30. Or a lot of guys use bits and burgers. I think bitses are probably the most versatile. They're $70, $80, which is a bit of an investment. But if you want to start fletching things the way that you want to, 4-fletch, and even I've seen some guys do the X-Wing style 4-fletch kind of stuff. I've never shot it. I tried to once. It just didn't work for me. A fletching jig is going to be really big too. But if you don't if you want custom arrows and you don't want to incur the cost of buying all that stuff, or if you think I'm going to build arrows maybe once every couple of years, it doesn't make sense for me to do this. When somebody like me, I'm constantly building and testing new arrows, and I'm building for friends and stuff like that. So it was easy for me to justify. But if you want to start doing some custom stuff, there are tons of guys out there that'll build really, really good quality arrows. And before, like, you'll press buy, but before they will even ship them to you, before they'll even build them, they'll call you, verify everything, and say, all right, Daniel, you're shooting a 70-pound bow. You've got a 30-inch draw. I saw that you said you were one of these 340s. These 340s aren't going to work for you. You're going to need this, and because of that, it's going to change your total arrow weight to this. If you really want to get back down to this, you can use this head versus this head, and they'll walk through that whole process for you. A good buddy of mine, Rob, runs Dynamic Archery Solutions, and like that's literally his outside of his 9-to-5 job. He's an engineer, but outside of that, he builds arrows for people. Like it's basically a second full-time job for him. And they're really, really good. And like I said, you don't have to spend a small fortune to get really quality stuff.
Yeah, and that's kind of the issue I ran into when I decided this last set of arrows that I built was I didn't know if I wanted to go buy a $100, $90 Bitzenberger and then like the arrow saw. And actually, what I did was something a little different. So there's a lot of good archery shops here in Kansas City, and shout out to Rogers Sporting Goods.
Yeah, I love Rogers. They're good guys up there.
They're really good guys up there. And what I did was I was a little cloak and dagger with them, but I bought some arrows from Black Eagle. I showed up and I told them I want these cut to 30 inches, 30 or 31 inches. And the fine gentleman there said, "Oh, that'd be perfect." And he squared them up for me, and he said, "I'll glue the inserts in." I said, "Don't glue the inserts in. I don't want you to do that." He said, "Oh, okay." He kind of looked at me weird. So I come home. I did a little bit of insert tuning, did some bare shaft tuning.
Yep.
And then I bought some 100 grain brass inserts there, and I glued them in myself, spun them. Everything was still good.
Yep.
So then I added, I think it's from Three Forks Archery. It's one of the traditional archery.
Three Rivers?
Three Rivers, yeah. I'm sorry. Some of those inserts that can add weight to your arrow.
Like weight tube?
Exactly, weight tube. Yeah. I think I got the 5 grain per inch ones.
Yeah, they make like a 5, a 7, and a 9 or
it's
something.
Crazy, man, amount of weight you can add. So I had about 85 of that to the front end of the arrow, and that got my FOC about 20%, which is where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
I think it's 651 grain arrow, total arrow weight.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Then I took him back to Rogers, and I was like, okay, I want a 3 fletch on this, right hand, but I don't want helical or anything. And they did that for me, and so they helped answer a couple questions with Knox and stuff. But so it was a little more work on my end because I had to go up there and come back, but to cut the arrows was like $1 an arrow.
Yeah.
To fletch them was like $3 an arrow.
$3 is typically the going rate. Yeah.
And they use Bitzenbergers. I went in a couple of archery shops and I saw a lot of Bitzenbergers.
That's kind of the gold standard is Bitzes. Yeah.
So if you're gonna buy a nice fletching jig, I think that's a really good route to go.
Yeah.
But you can try to do something like that if you kind of have the basic understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. If you know what you want, these shops can build it for you.
Yep.
Like building an arrow isn't rocket science as far as like the actual construction of it. Knowing why you're putting certain things, there's definitely a bit of a science to it. And a lot of those shops, I mean, they just they open up a package, whatever the inserts are, they just slap those in and just expect that's what you want. But in a lot of cases, that's if you take like what you said, like a week to really figure out what you want to build and why, then it can save you a lot of headache and cost later of having to rebuild everything.
Well, and the reason I wanted to do that is a lot of things I want to understand what's happening. So if I'm in the field or if I'm 1,000 miles away in Alabama about to go shoot a whitetail and a component on my arrow breaks, I can have an idea of why or how to fix that, or is this going to be a systematic issue with all my arrows?
Right.
I went to South Carolina earlier this year to hunt deer, and I got 6 arrows fletched by Rogers. And so I go out there, and about a day before I left, I was shooting a couple arrows in the backyard, and right when I released an arrow, I heard a and I'm like, huh. I go down there, and I'm missing one fletch.
Yeah.
And so and so I was like, well, that's not that big of a deal. The arrows were shooting really straight. I had bare shaft tuned them, so I felt really confident in shooting them. I got out to South Carolina, I shot a couple more arrows, had 2 or 3 more fletches fall off. So I was I had like 3 arrows, 3 good arrows, And I got back here, ran to Rogers, and they were like, man, let's refletch those for you. Everything was good to go. But I wasn't worried because I knew, okay, like if one of those fletches comes off, I've shot it that way.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
It'll be great. Yeah, and so some confidence, behind the bow, which I really like. But so there's a lot of information out there. I'd say the High Momentum Archery group on Facebook. You can get some info on there.
Yeah, I don't know if that group's even it may be hidden. don't even know if people can find it anymore.
Yeah, because people get kind of angry about
stuff. Ours is not hidden. It's closed, so you have to be a member to actually see it. But yeah, the Lethal Podcast Thunderdome, I think it's called Lethal Podcast the Thunderdome. Is closed, but you just answer a couple questions and you get in pretty quickly.
Well, Matt, we didn't even talk about that.
You're
on a podcast, or you host a podcast.
Yeah,
right?
I sure do.
So shout out, what's the name of that podcast? Where can people find it?
Yeah, Lethal Podcast, lethalpodcast.com. It's basically this kind of discussion, more in depth, and we're like 70 episodes deep at this point. We've got a couple of big, really cool guests and manufacturers coming up, so we're really excited about that. But yeah, we've been chugging along with that. We partnered with the Ashby Bowhunting Foundation earlier this year, and I think probably by the time this is announced, by this time this is posted, it'll be announced. But myself, Rob, and Garrett are being named the first 3 representatives for the Ashby Bowhunting Foundation. So we're really excited about that. But yeah, we've taken some time to sit down and talk about this and try and answer questions and have more of a long form discussion. I guess if guys watch guys like Troy, like Range Fairy and stuff like that, and they want a more in-depth technical discussion about stuff, we are that kind of podcast. Yeah.
And I think that's a good point to mention. Troy, Range Fairy, you can find him on YouTube. He kind of like the hunting public guys, and I want to make this comment. Matt and I were big into heavy arrows before the hunting public got into them, so I just want to make that.
We're OGs.
That's right. But if you're questioning this, or if you're like, man, I just don't know, watch a couple of his YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And I think he gives a good starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I mean, and Troy goes fairly in depth on some things, but there's like I said, you don't have to make this incredibly technical. Yep. It's really simple. Shoot a somewhat heavy arrow. Try and get to 500 grains. Just try to shoot a 500 grain arrow. Put a good cut-on contact broadhead on the front of it, and like a decent insert system that isn't going to break. Mm-hmm. That's really the the long and short of it. Yep. Is and that'll help your success rate tremendously. Especially, that will increase your odds of continuing to recover if that's the case. And a lot of guys, they I've been shooting rage for 20 years, never lost a deer. And I'm like, great. I wouldn't change either.
Yeah, good for you. And I, like I said, I kind of struggled with that when I was kind of questioning this or getting into heavy arrow stuff. It's like, well, I know a lot of dudes, anecdotal evidence, right? Yeah. That have killed deer with rages forever. Yeah. Or expandables forever. Yeah. But I posted on my Instagram a couple months ago. I don't know if you saw. I have a nice block target over there. Mm-hmm. It's about 18 inches deep on the long side, and I was able to get my arrow to penetrate through it. Yeah. All the way through. And so I've never done that with a lighter grain arrow.
No, you won't.
No, and so it's like, man, it kind of goes back to this where this isn't me telling you out of the tree stand. We have hard evidence that this has happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's really cool. Well, hey, so we talked a little bit about building arrows, about if you want to get started building arrows, there's a couple of options out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
If a guy wants to learn a little bit more about this, the Lethal podcast, yep. And then what are some other websites or things we can point people to?
So the Ashby Bowhunting Foundation website is incredible. They've got tons of information on there. It's ashbybowhunting.org. I always get the .org turned around. But ashbybowhunting.org. And there's like this information we talked about. There's lots of that information on there. If you're looking at just like bow hunting in general, man, like the hunting public is really good. Yep. There's a guy with a YouTube channel if you're wanting to learn more about just like shooting and just like archery tips in general. Brandon McDonald is really good. Our buddy Garrett Weaver runs On Point Podcast, and the On Point YouTube channel is really good. And if you're looking for like technical bow tuning stuff, our friends over at Limb Driven TV are about to drop I think it's 12 or 15 videos they actually made for the ABF, the Ashby Bowhunting Foundation, and from beginning to end kind of tuning stuff. And a lot of that stuff, not quite as in depth, is covered by the knock on stuff on YouTube. Mm-hmm. John's an incredible bow tuner. He's a bow wizard. He's an incredible shot. So yeah, there's a plethora of good information out there for sure. But yeah, those places like that is probably, if I was just getting into bow hunting, is where I would go. But realize that there is, if you jump into this head first, that's going to be like drinking from a fire hose.
Absolutely.
Like, take your time. You're going to get, if you try and swallow all of this in your first year, you're going to get so burnt out and you're going to hate it. And it's not going to be good for anybody. Mm-hmm. Your friends will hate you. Your spouse will hate you. Just take your time. Just enjoy it. Enjoy the ride. Mm-hmm. And also understand, have you ever heard the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's a big deal, especially right now with the heavy arrow thing. But just in general, when you're walking into archery, you're going to have this moment, like a month or two into it, you're going to be like, this is easy. I know everything there is about archery. And then you're going to hit that plateau and you're just going to crash hard and you'll be like, I'm such an idiot. Like, I don't understand any of this. And it'll happen. It happens to everybody, at least to some extent. So just be prepared for that.
No, that's true with a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
I heard someone explain the Dunning-Kruger effect to me is those that know the least are the most confident.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And those that are the most qualified are usually the least confident because
they
can know all the things that go wrong. So
yeah,
that is 100% true.
Yeah.
So we kind of talked to a couple basic things, mm-hmm. introduction things. So if I came to you like I did a couple years ago and said, hey man, I'm new to archery, I got a bow, I got some arrows that I bought from Walmart, what are 3 tips you're going to give me as a new archer?
As a new archer, from a shooting perspective, the thing you need to focus on is repetition and being able to do the same thing every single time, no matter what. Even if your form isn't perfect, if as long as you aren't doing something that's like completely detrimental, then it's not a big deal. Real Wild is like probably the second best like all-time professional archer behind Levi Morgan. And Real Wild's like form, if you like were to ask somebody about his form, they'd laugh him out of the room. Like it doesn't look good, but must be doing something right. Yep. Because he's consistently at the top of the podium, and that's because you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over. So yeah, repetition, create that muscle memory. From an arrow building perspective, keep it simple, and this is going to tie into the mental part. Keep it simple. You don't have to make it crazy complicated. Instead of 100 grain, mechanical, shoot a 125 grain fixed blade. Instead of your 15 grain insert that you normally run a 50 grain brass insert. You don't have to make this terribly complicated to come out with an exponentially more lethal setup. Mm-hmm. And 3, the mental game, enjoy it. Don't overcomplicate this. Well, 1, don't overcomplicate it, and don't view like everything short of harvesting an animal a failure. If not harvesting an animal was a failure, I'd probably be the biggest failure of all time. But every time you go into the woods, you like take the opportunity to learn something new, especially with bow hunting. I think it was Fred Bear that said it, that a bow hunter will learn more about deer in a week than a rifle hunter will learn in a lifetime. Yep. And I mean, I can't tell you how many deer I've been like, oh, there's a deer 100 yards away. Boom, it's gone. The first time I was like, I'm going to be serious about bow hunting, and deer's 40 yards away, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't shoot it. Like, but I've never seen a deer interact with me that close before. Yep. So yeah, just enjoy it. Enjoy the ride.
I would agree with all those points. Especially on, like I said, how much harder bow hunting is than gun hunting. Mm-hmm. And this is an endless debate. I know a lot of my buddies that are just rifle hunters. I'm both. Mm-hmm. During the 10 days of rifle season in Kansas, I have a rifle in my hand. Sure. Because I want to kill the deer I want to kill, and I got tags in my pocket. But what I've found about bow hunting is it's very satisfying when you are successful.
Absolutely.
And, the analogy or the story I tell is the first day I ever bow hunted, sitting in a stand looking for deer. It was in Alabama. I had 7 deer walk in that if I had a rifle would have been dead. Yeah. I killed the 8th one with the bow. Right. So that was the only one that I had the ability to get my bow up on, or was it within range, or I could draw, was in a position where I could draw on her. And so you look at that right there, to me, that's what got me hooked. because like, this is hard.
Yeah.
This isn't sitting and looking at a deer at 200 yards. I shot a deer last season at 225 yards across the pond.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't know I was there, and I just double lung harder, and she took a knee down, and she was done. Yeah. That was cool, and I love eating that meat. But it was a lot cooler to shoot that doe in Alabama.
Yeah.
It was right at 34 yards, I think.
That's a good poke.
Yeah, it was not, and we with the expandable, so this is before I was doing heavy arrow stuff.
That's all right.
And it took me 3 arrows. I knocked her down as finder, actually, with the first one, and then I had to go finish the job with the other 2 arrows, but no, it was a definite rewarding experience.
It's a very different feeling.
Oh, yeah.
It's very, not to steal from the push, but it's very primal.
Yep.
There's something very primal about, like, I'm going to go into the woods with, like, a pointy stick and
a string.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So the next 3 tips we're going to go over. So 3 reasons for current archers to go heavy. So I was talking to a buddy of mine earlier today about this, and he challenged me. He said, get him to convince me to go heavy.
Oh, okay. Well... like I previously mentioned, I think one of the really big reasons is quieting down the bow. I think that the overwhelming majority of string jumps come because the bow is so damn loud and it's such a high pitched cracking noise that deer just like flip out. And that's, all animals can jump, especially whitetail and antelope and stuff like that. But I think quieting down the bow substantially is a really, really big perk to that. Just the increased shot opportunity, I'd say is point number 2. I had, the year I decided to go heavier was a year I got a deer on camera that was... He was every bit of 180, 185 inches. Like, easily the biggest deer we've ever had on our property. And I knew where he was... Well, I thought I knew where he was bedded. Spoiler alert, I was wrong. But I knew, like, no matter where this guy comes from, like, if I see him one time and there is some type of shot opportunity, I have to take that shot. So I would hate for somebody to, like, have the buck of a lifetime walk in on them, and because they aren't confident in their equipment in that aspect, they don't take that shot. So that'd be point number 2 for me. Point number 3, I think it benefits all of the hunting community when you do so. Like I said, there's it never fails. Every year there's anti-hunting people are out to get us. And believe me, going down to Dallas Safari Club, where trophy hunting is the buzzword down there. We're quite literally running into protesters down there that if they caught you in an alley, they'd probably try and kill you. I don't think it'd go too well for them, but they'd try. But man, do everything you can to not give that person a reason to dislike you. So I think that's really important. But I guess to sum up all of that, I think there's a really good book that your listeners should read called Bowhunting Success from a guy named Jeremy Johnson. Next time I swing by, I'll loan it to you. But in that book, Jeremy puts it really, really plainly. The benefit of the only downside to a heavy arrow is trajectory. The only plus side to a light arrow is trajectory. There's only benefits to going heavier outside of your trajectory changes a little bit. But like I said, I'm not asking the world of people. I'm not trying to tell them to go from 300 to 700 grains. Just try and get to 500. Let's just bump that broadhead weight up a little bit. Add a brass insert or something like that, and you're probably going to be ready to rock.
Yeah, that's, if I could sum it up simply, it's a more ethical way.
Absolutely.
Just a more ethical way to kill animals. And, a lot of the guys who are in the Midwest here, a lot are deer hunters.
Yep.
So that's an advantage to us in some ways because it's deer are thin-skinned, a little bit easier to kill.
Super thin-skinned animal.
Then, you're looking at elk, or going up to moose or something like that. It makes a lot more sense going heavy, but there's a lot of whitetail shot every year, a lot of whitetail killed every year, and we want to increase the killed number between the shot. Like
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the other big perk to that is, me and you, we hunt whitetail, and then we get the opportunity to go hunt elk or something like that. Man, it's really nice when I don't have to completely change my arrow setup or buy a whole new arrow setup to go hunt elk or to go hunt moose or bear or whatever. If you're shooting 500-600 grains, you're already there. You're fine. Yep. And that's another big plus to shooting those heavy arrows.
Yeah, I got a buddy of mine in Arkansas, and he got a really nice bear on camera, and he's a light arrow guy, and he was kind of joking with me. He's like, your arrows would be just fine for that. I said, yes, they would be. So,
yeah. We actually had a bear on camera at our farm in central Missouri.
Oh man,
yeah.
I think they're talking about doing a bear season.
They are. I didn't get drawn for the 5-person elk season this year. I'm really bummed about it. But yeah, I think they're coming spring, I think they're going to end up having a bear season, which would be cool.
That's really cool. And I'm for any legal hunting.
Yeah.
And especially if we can get animals delisted or in states that are regulated, if there's a huntable population.
Yeah.
It increases knowledge about that animal. If people have a personal experience with something, they're a lot more in tune to care for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think if there's an opportunity to hunt them, that gives some people some more information.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. There's quite literally, like, you have everything to gain when you give hunters the opportunity to ethically pursue an animal.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much.
Yeah, man,
for coming over. It took us a couple days to kind of get this worked out.
Yeah. Sorry about that. All hell broke loose at work, so it was everything went sideways. But I'm glad we got to do it.
I am too, man. Well, I'm gonna close this up, and then I'm going to go catfishing up a little bit.
Oh, man, there you go.
Yeah, it's not going to be a bad night for me, but thank you again for coming over.
Yeah, of course.
Any shout-outs or anything else you want to say?
Shout out to my wife for I don't know if I haven't really told many people. I had like a pretty major surgery about 2 months ago now. And long story short, I went like full-blown sepsis, and I had to get opened up from here, like at the base of my sternum, all the way down to my waistline.
Wow.
And it was a long recovery. Like there was a month there where it was difficult for me to even get out of bed. But my wife has been incredible in helping me through that. So shout out to her.
Man, our wives are awesome, aren't they?
No kidding.
I travel a little bit or a lot of bit.
You travel a ton.
I do, and I have 2 little ones and a dog. Dog sitting here next to us, and my wife's a rock star. She's in med school. We have 2
I was going to
kids.
say, when we first met, I think she was just starting.
Yep.
So she's probably getting close to buttoning it up.
Yeah.
And, then she's got residency.
Yeah. It's a long time.
Oh, I'm well aware. aware.
No, both of our wives are very understanding and supportive.
Yeah, very lucky to have women like that.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Matt, thanks for coming over, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, man, absolutely.